Welcome to Holmeyhorror. I've been waiting for you. Remains. Ashbrook wasn't the kind of town that bred horror stories. It was a quiet, ordinary place where the most exciting news was a bake sale or a school fundraiser. But behind the closed doors of an unremarkable home on a sleepy cul-de-sac, Daniel Ward was creating something unspeakable. To the outside world, Daniel was a reserved man, maybe a little odd, but harmless. At 35, he lived alone, worked as a clerk at the hardware store, and occasionally attended town events. He had a reputation for being polite but distant, the kind of neighbor who waved from his porch but never stopped for small talk. But beneath the facade, Daniel harbored a grotesque obsession. It started with anatomy textbooks in high school, where he became fixated on the intricacies of the human body. Over time, this interest evolved into something darker. By his early 20s, Daniel had begun experimenting, first with animals, then with what he euphemistically called opportunities. His collection grew in secret. The basement of his modest home became a macabre gallery, one that combined precision with a chilling lack of humanity. Hidden behind a false wall in the laundry room, Daniel's basement was the heart of his depravity. It was cold and clinical, lit by a single stark bulb that cast long shadows on the concrete walls. Shelves lined the perimeter, each meticulously organized. Jars filled with human remains floated in a viscous preservative, labeled with names and dates. Limbs were neatly wrapped and frozen in industrial freezers. Bones were cleaned and arranged like exhibits. In the center of the room stood a stainless steel table, gleaming under the harsh light. Nearby, surgical tools were laid out on carts, each one spotless and sharp. But Daniel's fascination with his victims didn't stop at dissection. He wanted to consume them. Literally. The first time he tried, it was almost an accident. Late one night, after processing a victim, he noticed the heft of a thigh and the marbling of the flesh. It reminded him of a roast. He couldn't resist. He prepared the meat with care, seasoning it like a chef crafting a masterpiece. The first bite was transcendent. He'd never felt so close to his work, so intimately connected to his collection. It became part of his ritual. Daniel's victims were chosen carefully. He preferred those who wouldn't be missed, drifters, loners, and outcasts. But one day he met Lucas Grant, and everything changed. Lucas was different. He wasn't a drifter or an outcast. He was vibrant, charismatic, and full of life. They met by chance at a coffee shop where Lucas struck up a conversation about a book Daniel was reading. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something stir within him, something more than hunger. Lucas fascinated him. Daniel began orchestrating ways to bump into Lucas around town, learning his routines and habits. Lucas, friendly and unsuspecting, thought nothing of their encounters. He even invited Daniel to a bar one evening, but Daniel declined. He preferred control. Eventually, Daniel invited Lucas to his home for dinner. The house smelled of roasted meat and spices when Lucas arrived. He complimented Daniel's cooking skills as they sat down to eat. "This is amazing," Lucas said, cutting into the tender, juicy steak. "What is it?" "An old family recipe," Daniel replied with a faint smile. Lucas ate heartily, unaware of the true nature of his meal. Daniel watched him intently, savoring every bite Lucas took. It felt poetic in a way, a merging of lives, a prelude to what was to come. As the evening wore on, Daniel poured Lucas another glass of wine, subtly laced with a sedative. Lucas's eyelids grew heavy, and his speech slurred. "What's happening?" he mumbled, swaying in his chair. Daniel leaned forward, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Don't worry, you're going to be part of something special." Lucas awoke strapped to the steel table in Daniel's basement. The harsh light above him was blinding, and the cold metal beneath him sent shivers through his body. "Daniel," he shouted, struggling against the restraints. "What the hell is this?" Daniel appeared from the shadows, his expression serene. He was dressed in a surgical gown, gloves snapping into place as he approached. "You're unique, Lucas," Daniel said, his voice soft and eerily calm. "I've never met anyone quite like you. I want to preserve that." Lucas thrashed against the straps. "You're insane. Daniel ignored him, selecting a scalpel from the cart. "Insanity is subjective," he murmured. "I prefer to think of myself as an artist." The first incision was deliberate, almost reverent. Daniel worked with the precision of a surgeon, his movements steady despite Lucas's muffled screams. He didn't rush. This was his masterpiece. After hours of meticulous work, Daniel paused to admire his progress. Lucas, barely conscious, stared at him with glassy, terrified eyes. "You'll live on," Daniel whispered, "in more ways than one." When Lucas didn't show up for work the next day, his sister Mara knew something was wrong. She and Lucas were close, speaking nearly every day. She reported his disappearance to the police, but they dismissed it as an adult choosing to go off-grid. Frustrated, Mara began her own investigation. She retraced Lucas's steps, eventually discovering his connection to Daniel. A search of Lucas's texts revealed a dinner invitation from Daniel, sent the night he disappeared. Mara confronted the police with her findings, but they insisted there was no evidence linking Daniel to Lucas's disappearance. Desperate, Mara decided to confront Daniel herself. Mara knocked on Daniel's door, her heart pounding. When he answered, he looked surprised but composed. "Hi, I'm Mara," she said, forcing a smile. "I think you know my brother Lucas?" Daniel hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, of course. Lovely guy. We had dinner a few nights ago." "Did he mention where he was going after?" Mara asked. Daniel shook his head. "No, he left around 9. I haven't heard from him since." Mara's instinct screamed that he was lying. But without proof, she couldn't push further. That night, Mara broke into Daniel's home, determined to find answers. She searched the house, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. In the laundry room, she noticed scratches on the floor near the wall. Pushing against the paneling, she uncovered the hidden door. The basement smelled of chemicals and decay, and the sight before her made her stomach churn. Jars of preserved body parts lined the shelves. Bones were arranged in grotesque displays. And in the freezer, Mara found what remained of Lucas, his limbs neatly severed, his flesh partially missing. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Before Mara could flee, she heard the creak of footsteps above. The basement door opened, and Daniel descended, his face calm but his eyes alight with fury. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice cold. Mara grabbed a scalpel from the table and lunged at him, but Daniel sidestepped her easily. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she dropped the blade. "You'll ruin everything," he hissed, dragging her toward the table. Mara screamed and fought, but Daniel overpowered her, strapping her to the table. "This is your fault," he said, his tone almost sad. "I didn't want to do this, but you forced my hand." As he prepared his tools, Mara's screams echoed through the basement. When the police finally raided the house days later, they found only the remains of Daniel's victims. Among them was a fresh jar labeled with Mara's name. But Daniel was gone, leaving behind a trail of terror and an appetite that would never be satisfied. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling stories. And remember, be careful. I'll be watching you.